Hey y'all, I'm Cal. Let's get messy. Hi guys, welcome back. You know, I used to believe bullying was something we outgrow. That it belonged in the world of playgrounds and name calling and stolen lunch money. But then I grew up, right? And I realized that bullies do not disappear, y'all. They just get promoted. Now they wear suits, they sit in HR meetings, they attend PTA fundraisers, and they do it all with a big, huge smile on their face. And the part that really messes with your head is they're harder to call out because adult bullies are experts in plausible deniability. Um, and I want you to remember that phrase before you ever even think about turning to HR or higher ups for help because they are not there to help you. It's not like going to your teacher or going to the principal. They are not your friend, and I want you to remember that. They are the supporters and as I call them, the cover-uppers of the problems. So, if you've ever felt crazy for thinking this feels like bullying, you're not crazy. You're also not wrong. And I wanted to talk today about the kind of bullying that no one really warns you about, the kind that follows you from childhood into boardrooms and team meetings. Some of us were never given the luxury of outgrowing or growing out of being targets. And the silence around it, it has to stop. We have to stop being scared, which is what I've been for a very, very, very long time. But eventually you have to stop being scared and speak up. Before I dive too deep into my personal experience, I want to clear a couple things up, be very, direct and upfront. Bullying doesn't always look like schoolyard taunts or physical threats. And adult bullying, especially in workplaces, it's very subtle, unless you're the one who's being crushed by it. It's the kind of criticism that feels very targeted and cutting and personal. It's, being spoken to like you're an unruly child while you're just sitting there trying to do, the work of three people and, you know, do the best work you can. It's being ignored until they need a hero. And suddenly you're the solution to all of the problems they caused, right? And the kicker is that most of it is not technically illegal. I said most. Unless somebody's threatening you with a weapon or screaming slurs in the break room, it gets dismissed as personality conflict or communication issue. But because it's not in the legal handbook, doesn't mean it's not psychologically violent, right? Especially for us neurodivergent folks, it's deep. And it's not because we're weak, it's because we're aware. We feel it, we absorb it. And more often than not, we've seen it play out before. But I also want to be very clear about the fact that I'm not a victim. I'm not here for pity. I'm not a victim in the way that, people usually mean when they say the word. I hate the word survivor, but that's exactly what it is. I stayed at the table longer than I should have, right? I smiled through situations I should have walked away from. I didn't speak up loudly and as soon as I should have. I trusted authority figures who told me, to document everything, keep my head down, take the high road, give it time. You can't outlast a bully, y'all. You literally just lose more of yourself trying to. So, when I talk about the last 2 years of my life, I'm not speaking from a place of helplessness or pity. I'm speaking from the tension of endurance, right? From the fallout of trusting the wrong people. And the strength that you have to muster every day to survive 1,000 tiny attacks that, most people pretend they don't see, but then tell you in secret that they do, but then won't speak up about it on their own. My oldest memory of bullying was in a group setting in elementary school, right? So I was the fat kid, the weird kid that everyone liked, or so I thought at the time. I'm still naive, but picked on relentlessly. And I went to sit down at the lunch table. And those kinds where it's like one long table that folds up and the seats are attached to them. This is back in the 80s. I went to sit down with my lunch tray, and every kid at my table bounced up like that out of their seats. I remember two scenes from that day. Watching it happen, like I physically remember the moment that it happened. And then the other part that I remember is standing in the corner in the principal's office, waiting room, crying, like ugly crying, and eating a Snicker. Note the Snicker, my only friend and protector for as long as I can remember food. Anyway, I can remember looking at my parents during that time of my life thinking, gosh, I can't wait to grow up and get to go to work every day where I don't have to worry about stuff like this and I'll have friends. Yeah. The truth is, not much changes, you guys. The scenery shifts, cafeteria benches become cubicles, group projects become staff meetings, but the dynamics is so familiar. I really wish I could say that day in the principal's office was the end of it. That things got better with age, that I somehow figured out the secret handshake to being included or understood, or at the very least, left the hell alone. But what really happened was, and this happens to so many of us, I just kept collecting these experiences, different environments, different people, same patterns. Whether it was my weight, the way I talked, the way I didn't talk, the fact that I didn't always understand sarcasm or social cues. There was always something to other me. And when you've been othered your whole life, you start to think, okay, well, maybe it is me. I heard a line yesterday. I was watching season 3 of Love on the Spectrum, and James said, well, the common denominator is me. And that's what you start thinking, well, I'm the common denominator. Maybe I just have to try harder or smile more or get it right this time. But trying harder does not stop the bullies, y'all. It feeds them. And the past 2 years were some of the worst I've ever experienced in my adult life. I won't get into details here, partly because I'm still unpacking it, and partly because details don't always matter as much as the aftermath. But what I will say is this. I was in a workplace, like I'm sure so many out there, where bullying is dressed up as professionalism, where silence is safer than the truth, where being kind made me a target and asking questions made me insubordinate. I became a shell of myself over the past 2 years. My confidence went in a hole and disappeared, doubting everything, bracing for impact daily, just slowly unraveling. And, to the outside world, I was fine, I'm sure, just like I was when I was that fat, weird kid holding a Snickers and crying in the principal's office. But this time I was 49, 50 years old. And this time, once I reached that breaking point, I just wasn't going to stay silent anymore. So to give you a general overview of how this company worked, it was like most, we're a family. You've heard that before, right? But within this family, excuse me, there were clearly two groups, the grown-up table and the kids table. They're the ones that mattered and the ones who got things done for the ones that mattered, but still didn't really matter. Make sense? So you could walk in and within 5 minutes figure out exactly who fell into which group. And by about 2 weeks in, I knew I was in trouble. And that should have been my sign, but I'm a slow learner in that regard. I saw something happen between my coworker and our boss, and it just made my stomach turn in the treatment of my coworker, regardless of the excuses I have heard for my boss's behavior. Excuses by HR and so many other people defending their behavior. Red flag, I folded it up, tucked it in my back pocket like so many of us do. And then it starts to build slowly. You get those minor moments here or there. And then every once in a while, bam, those big ones they hit you square in the forehead. And one of the first really big ones, it wasn't necessarily a bullying moment, but it provided a glimpse into this person's thinking and behavior. So they walked into the room where I was sitting with a brand new team member and threw their headphones across the floor and screamed, "No one around here respects me." Like a 4-year-old. It was like a 4-year-old's tantrum. And I just sat there frozen, silent. And then all of a sudden, I spend the next year on weekly, sometimes daily calls with that same coworker, both of us ugly crying about how messed up everything was. I went to leadership. My coworker went to leadership 3 times. Crickets. And then another big one. And I kind of do put this into the bullying category because it sets up the atmosphere and sort of acts as an indicator of how people treat or talk about or act towards those that they don't like. So there was a big group meeting full of longtime employees. It was just me and one other new team member, maybe 3 or 4 months in that they had been there. And the entire conversation between all of these people was bashing one person, like full on name calling, trash talking, like high school mean girl stuff, like stuff like, "Well, if this happens, we're all leaving. If we have to do this, well, with this person, well, F this place. We're all quitting." Just ugly, ugly name calling. And it was so intense. And I'm just sitting there, again, frozen. And I would occasionally glance at the new teammate and wondering what the hell they must be thinking. But then the other part of me is like, why is this okay? What? Is this how I'm supposed to act? Is this where I've been getting it wrong? Is this the flabbergasted? I don't get it. And I've replayed so many of these moments in my mind, wondering, if I had said something differently or done something differently, would things have turned out better? But when I look back at those 2 moments, the outburst, the verbal gang ups in the meetings, I realized something. No, just no. I don't want to live in a world where that is okay. I don't want to work in an environment where that's okay. But then not being okay with it makes me the problem. I told my sister, I can't even count how many times, I feel like I'm living in the Twilight Zone. And all I kept hearing was, well, that's just the way the world works. That's just how it is. You've got to play the game. Excuse after excuse. But the real reason things stay the same is because we You, me, and everyone else on the receiving end stay quiet out of fear, because we need a paycheck, because we need our insurance. And what's really worse to me is the ones sitting at the grown-up table, the ones who matter, they stay quiet, you know. And if that's you, you're not just complicit, you're part of the problem. You're part of that machine that keeps this system running. So we all have different breaking points, right? It's different for everyone. I know that. I also know that there are people enduring this exact kind of abuse every single day just to survive, to keep a roof over their heads. For me, I knew it was coming. I could feel it building. And I also knew that when I hit that moment, that I would know, without a doubt, I would know when it was time to just call it quits. And it just so happened to fall on a random Thursday morning. So let me set the stage. We've already established that I had a boss, not a leader, right? Not a mentor, not a team player, just a boss. This person prided themselves on the title of boss. In fact, told me one time, I have worked my whole life to be the boss. And this boss, in addition to making so many unethical and frankly illegal requests that fortunately I refused to carry out, was also physically absent 60 to 70% of the time. And when they were there, they weren't there. You know what I mean? Their attention during calls was always on their phone or their email or some other distraction. Even if you asked them to be present, it wouldn't last for more than a minute or two. Now, I don't know what this person was like in their communication with the people they answered to, but with us that didn't matter, felt no need to be present at all. Lots of comments like, well, I shouldn't have to do that. I'm the boss. Or, nobody's as busy as I am. I don't have time for this. Y'all can figure it out. You could be talking to this person and they were just completely checked out, right? That Thursday, the Thursday of what I call the incident, before the final incident, we had a scheduled call with an outside vendor to finalize a process that I had been working on for months. My boss had technically set up the call, but I want to be clear here. I had done the research, the preparation, the groundwork, everything leading up to it. And that morning, the morning of the call, it was at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I got hit hard with a UTI. And if you've ever had a UTI, you know. If you haven't, you don't want to know. So I managed to get a doctor's appointment that day. And unfortunately, it was during the meeting time, but otherwise I was going to have to wait 3 more days. So I was like, yes, get me in. So I messaged my boss on Teams asking, can you talk for a second? And they replied, give me 3 minutes. Well, 20 minutes later, I go back to check because I hadn't heard from them and they were offline. Just completely gone. Not a follow-up, nothing, which wasn't unusual. So I emailed them to explain what was going on. And then I called a coworker and I was like, hey, have you heard from our boss? And they said, yeah, I talked to them right before they logged off. Their eyes were bothering them and they're going to take the rest of the day off. And so I'm sitting there thinking, well, wait, okay, well, you talked to them, but they couldn't call me back, whatever. So I canceled the vendor meeting and asked to reschedule. They agreed immediately and rescheduled for the following week. And then when I'm at the doctor's office, 10 minutes before the original meeting time, I get a text from my boss that it was barely coherent text. So I'm not sure what was going on when they texted it to me. But it just said something like, they wouldn't be attending the call because, and then it cut off. And so I texted back, okay, I'm at the doctor's office. I rescheduled the call. And they texted back, okay, that was it. Never thought anything else about it. Never heard another word about it. Fast forward to the following Thursday, quitting day. I get a message from my boss first thing in the morning. Can we talk? Now, remember, this person had been MIA between the previous Thursday and today. Tried to talk to the boss multiple times. Couldn't get a response. There was no time for me. So when we get on the phone, they immediately start berating me for canceling the vendor call, telling me I had no right to reschedule it, telling me that, they've been working so hard to set this up and get this going, and I need to let them decide when it should be rescheduled. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, if it was that important, why were you just going to not show up to it anyway? You weren't even going to be on the call. And so they kept going, using things like, if you're going to, use flex time, you have to get it approved in advance. And I was like, okay, well, I tried. I messaged you. I emailed you. I told you I was the doctor. You never responded. They accused me of not trying hard enough to reach them. That the messages and emails weren't sufficient. Literally held up their phone and said, this is how you reach me. Well, I can tell you, I have tried that method in the past, and that doesn't work much better either. Y'all, I am 50 years old. I've been doing the work of 3 people for 2 years. I blocked this person from defrauding the federal government. I stayed quiet while this person disclosed my autism diagnosis to another coworker. I spent 2 years dropping everything at the snap of this person's fingers to make sure they looked good. And now I'm supposed to sit here and take this, just the berating comments, knowing that if I speak back too harshly, it's just going to make everything worse. It's going to get me nowhere, which is what I've learned over the past 2 years. It was a lot more peaceful just to keep your mouth shut and take it. And so I said, okay, talk to you later, sat there in silence and went back to work. And it was just going to be another day of taking it. And then I got an email from them ceasing HR with a summary of our conversation written in a way that made it look like I had done something wrong. And I just snapped, that was the paper trail. Let's not forget that I had reported this person to senior leadership and HR 3 times. Another coworker had gone to HR. I had used the words hostile and bullying. You guys, there was a target on my back, and I knew it. They didn't just let this person get away with it. They handed them the matches and sat back and watched it burn down. So I had 2 choices in that moment. I could have financial security for a little bit longer until they figured out a way to fire me for complaining, which is exactly what the plan was. I'm certain of it. Or I could choose my dignity. And, you get to a point where you have to choose your dignity. And I chose that over a paycheck. I chose it over health insurance, over a roof over my head, over survival. And absolutely no one should be forced to make that choice. And it sickens me that we live in a world where, well, that's just the way it is, right? That's just the way it is. And here's where I lose most people. I don't hold any ill will towards my boss, this person. at all. None. Never have. Even when I would, share what was going on with people I was close to, it was all like, but I feel so bad for them because, they have their own problems. Or I pity them because this is the only way they know how to react to whatever's going on in their life. You know, they're unqualified for their position. They're unsupported by the higher ups, obviously. They've been encouraged to act this way for one reason or another. And so how do you not feel compassion and pity for somebody like that? That's just my natural response to it, is just compassion and pity. Because that person's not the whole problem. That person is the symptom. And the real problem goes much higher and much bigger. And I think it starts with the way our world is constructed, these systems we've set up, these man-made hierarchies of power. But beyond that, it starts at the top of the chain in whatever company you're in, and it spreads through every person who could speak up but doesn't, including myself. I didn't speak up loudly enough or in the right way, whatever. Everyone with power, though, who chooses to be silent, everyone who trades justice for self-preservation, they're complicit too. And nobody prepares you for what happens after you finally walk away. You think there'll be relief, and sometimes there is, but I talked about in my last podcast or the one before that, the panic attacks that you still have weeks after. There's grief and there's shame and there's rage and there's exhaustion and embarrassment, and you question everything. You start to wonder, did you overreact? And I constantly have to ask David to remind me, because he witnessed all of it. All of it. Much of it firsthand in the room, hearing it. You replay every moment on a loop, trying to see if you missed something, if you could have fixed it, if maybe you were the problem after all. But I don't claim to be right about a lot of things. In this situation, I was not the problem. I was not the problem. And chances are likely that you aren't either if you're feeling this way. You do what you have to do to survive. And when you've spent months or even years bracing for impact, that survival mode doesn't just turn off because you're finally out. The hypervigilance, the fatigue, the lingering, maybe it was me. And you have to unlearn it. And it does take time. And I'm still unlearning it. This isn't just a story, you guys. It's a pattern. I'm not telling some extraordinary story that's never been told before. I'm telling it because it is ordinary, tragically ordinary. And I think it's especially so for people in the neurodivergent and disabled communities. We're the ones who get labeled difficult when we ask questions, unprofessional when we, get overwhelmed, too sensitive when we speak up, not a team player when we dare to advocate for ourselves. We're breaking under these systems. And this isn't about one bad boss. It's about a culture that rewards power over people, appearance over ethics, a title over humanity. And so going through all of this was a huge driving force for me to create this program that I'm working on, a coaching program for burned out neurodivergent professionals who face this kind of thing. I'm creating it because we need to have more resources, people who have lived it, not just theorize about it, but have lived through it. working through it and developing it has been very, very therapeutic for me. And I'm so thankful, honestly, to have the opportunity to do it. So, anyway, guys, yeah, I just kind of wanted to share my story with you. It's a common story. You've probably heard it before. If you haven't and you're experiencing something similar, you're not alone. To quote what I was told, it is just the way it is, but it doesn't mean it's okay, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't speak out against it, and it doesn't mean that we shouldn't demand change. I think we're at a point where more people are facing it than there are people in power, right? And I really feel like the rise up is going to be big. So don't be afraid to speak up. I will say this, if you're in the situation and you are forced to stay in the situation out of fear for a paycheck and insurance, I get it. I get it. I get it. You have not reached my breaking point. We all have different breaking points. We all know that what we're willing to give up for peace, and mine was different than yours, and that is okay. But in the meantime, document, document, document. Every single word. Make that your part-time job. It was mine. I have every single word documented. I have every single date, dollar in action documented. And unfortunately, we have to do that to protect ourselves. So keep doing it. Protect yourself. And speak up when you feel ready to speak up, but be ready to follow through with protecting yourself after you do speak up, because nobody there is going to help you. You're on your own in the workplace. But there are resources out there to help you. I would love to hear from other people who have experienced, work environments like this. If you're still in it, how are you dealing with it? If you've managed to get out of it, how? What did you do? What was your breaking point? What was your process of pulling away from it? Did you jump out of the fire and into the frying pan to another environment that was equally bad or worse? We got to talk about these things, you guys. We cannot let the fear continue once we have escaped the situations that we felt stuck in. So if you need guidance, need support, please reach out. All of my information is in the contact. I don't have anything else to say, you guys. Love you. Bye. Hope you'll come back next time.